The corridors of the Ravelin Ark did not hum. They vibrated with a low, tooth-rattling frequency that settled somewhere behind the eyes and refused to leave. It was the sound of the spire, the massive resonance pillar that pinned the orbital fortress to the fabric of stable space. But today, to Robert, it sounded like the drum roll of an execution. 2 guards flanked him. They were human, wearing the standard-issue kinetic armor of the Coalition, but their faces were tight with the fear they tried to mask as discipline. Robert stumbled slightly as they shoved him around a sharp bulkhead corner. He was a xenotech, a man who spent his days with grease under his fingernails and diagnostic displays reflected in his retinas, not a prisoner of war. "Look," Robert said, his voice raspy, from the dry recycled air. "If this is about the calibration error in Sector 7, I already filed a report. The harmonic damper was off by 0.03%. It is a rounding error, not sabotage." Ugh. The guard on his right did not even look at him. "Quiet. Command is waiting." "Command," Robert muttered to himself. "Wonderful. I have not even had coffee yet, and I am about to be yelled at by someone with more medals than brain cells." They reached the heavy blast doors of the parade deck. The metal was cold sweating with condensation. The doors hissed open, revealing a cavernous space that could have housed 3 interceptor ships side by side. But the ships were gone. In their place stood an army. On the left stood the human battalions, rigid in their blue and charcoal uniforms, weapons holstered but hands hovering near their belts. On the right, a sea of gray and silver fur rippled like a living storm. The Gray Banner, the alien wolf warriors, stood a head taller than the average human, their armor crafted from articulated plates that moved with their breathing. The smell hit Robert instantly, a mix of ozone gun oil and the musk of 1,000 apex predators. The silence was absolute, heavier than the gravity plating beneath his boots. Robert was marched to the center of the room, a lone figure in a grease-stained jumpsuit, standing between 2 species that were technically at peace, but practically holding a knife to each other's throats. At the far end of the deck, raised on a dais made of obsidian alloy, stood Captain Miriam Holt. She looked like she had been carved from the same metal as the ship, her expression, one of long-suffering exhaustion managed by sheer willpower. But Robert's eyes were drawn to the figure standing next to her. Commander Sable Arden. She was terrifying. Her fur was the color of storm clouds, marked with the white scars of plasma burns across her shoulder. She wore the ceremonial armor of the Wolf High Command, a suit that prioritized mobility and intimidation over coverage. Her helmet was off, revealing golden eyes that locked onto Robert with the intensity of a targeting laser. Robert swallowed. He felt the vibration of the spire change pitch beneath his feet. He was sensitive to it, a side effect of 10 years working on resonance cores. Something was wrong with the station's heartbeat, but right now, the threat in front of him felt more immediate. "Robert Vance," Captain Holt's voice boomed over the address system, though she looked like she would rather be anywhere else. "You are brought before this assembly regarding the incident at the Spire access terminal." "The incident," Robert blinked. "I adjusted a valve. It was leaking coolant." "You touched the sacred alignment," a growl erupted from the wolf ranks. A lieutenant stepped forward, baring teeth that looked capable of shearing through steel. "No human hands are permitted on the core during the eve of calibration." "It was going to explode," Robert shouted back, his annoyance overriding his survival instinct. "If I had not touched it, your sacred alignment would be a sacred crater right now." The growl from the Gray Banner deepened, a collective rumble that vibrated in Robert's chest. The human soldiers stiffened, hands wrapped around pistol grips. Sable Arden moved. She did not walk. She flowed down the steps of the dais, a predator descending from a ridge. The sound of her claws clicking against the metal deck was the only noise in the room. She stopped, 2 feet from Robert. She was tall, looming over him. Up close, the intelligence in her eyes was startling. It was not animalistic rage. It was cold, calculated assessment. She reached out. Robert flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, her hand clad in a gauntlet that left her sharp black claws exposed grabbed the front of his jumpsuit. She yanked him forward. The movement was violent, possessive. She slammed her other hand against his chest, right over his heart, and then pressed her own forehead against his for a split second. It was an intimate, shocking breach of personal space. Robert could smell the scent of rain and iron on her. Then she shoved him back, turned to face her own growling soldiers, and raised her voice. It was a voice that commanded artillery fire and orbital bombardments. "You say he defiled the ritual," Sable shouted, her voice echoing off the bulkheads. "You say his touch is an insult." She looked back at Robert, her golden eyes burning with a strange, unreadable fire. She held up the hand that had grabbed him, displaying it to the room. "Touch me," Sable announced, her tone shattering the tension like glass. "I am your wife now." For 3 seconds, the universe seemed to pause. Robert stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. His brain tried to process the syntax of the sentence. "Touch me, I'm your wife now." It was a challenge. She was inverting the accusation. If touching the core was a crime, touching the commander was a death sentence unless it was a bond. The roar that erupted from the gray banner was not anger. It was a chaotic mix of shock, submission, and confusing rhythmic howling. It was the sound of a hierarchy being rewritten in real time. On the human side, Captain Holt dropped her datapad. It clattered loudly on the floor. Robert stared at the back of Sable's head. "I am your wife now." "Excuse me," Robert whispered, though no one could hear him over the din. "I really just wanted to complain about the coffee." Sable turned back to him. Her face was set in stone, but her eyes flickered with a warning. "Stand straight," she hissed low enough that only he could hear. "You are the bondmate of the High Commander. If you slouch, they will tear your throat out, just to test your durability." "Bondmate," Robert squeaked. "Wait, you said—" "I said what I had to say," she cut him off. She grabbed his wrist, her grip like a vice, and raised his hand into the air along with hers. "This man is under the protection of the Grey," she bellowed to the room. "His blood is my blood. His honor is my honor. Strike him, and you strike the High Command. Does anyone wish to challenge my claim?" She glared at the wolf lieutenant, who had spoken earlier. The wolf lowered his ears, his tail tucking slightly, and stepped back into the line. "No challenge," the lieutenant muttered. Captain Holt stepped up to the microphone, her face pale. She clearly realized that arresting Robert now would mean declaring war on the Grey Banner. "The Coalition acknowledges the status of Commander Arden," Holt said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The inquiry into Technician Vance is suspended, pending diplomatic review." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. He had just been traded. He was no longer a mechanic. He was a political hostage in the shape of a husband. Thrum. The sound came from outside the hull, deep and dissonant. It was not the normal vibration of the spire. It was a sick, warping noise, like a cello string being pulled until it snapped. The lights on the parade deck flickered and turned a sickly, bruised purple. Through the massive, reinforced viewports that lined the starboard wall, the blackness of space twisted. The spire, a needle of white light stretching kilometers into the void, pulsed. A dark tear appeared in the fabric of the starlight behind it. It looked like a wound in the universe. Robert felt a sharp pain behind his eyes. It was the resonance. It was wrong. It was bleeding. "Did you hear that?" a soldier near the front rank whispered, clutching his helmet. "Someone called my name." "I heard it too," another muttered, eyes widening. "It sounded like my sister." Sable's grip on Robert's wrist tightened until it hurt. "Do not listen," she commanded, not just to him, but to the room. "Eyes forward, discipline." But the fear was already spreading. The tear in space rippled, and for a moment the shadows in the corners of the deck seemed to stretch, reaching out like fingers. A figure materialized at Robert's elbow. It was Dr. Cassian Reed, the head scientist of the Spire project. He was a thin man with eyes that looked too old for his face. He wore a lab coat that seemed too large for his frame. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Reed whispered. His voice was dry like shifting sand. "Dr. Reed," Robert managed to say. "The harmonics, they are shifting. That tear shouldn't be there." "No," Reed agreed. He leaned in closer, his gaze fixed on the dark anomaly outside the window. "Listen to me closely, Robert. You are going to hear things tonight. The spire is the lock and someone is picking it. But the things on the other side, they know us. They know what we have lost." Robert looked at the scientist, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. "What are you talking about?" "If you hear a voice," Dr. Reed said, his eyes finally locking onto Robert's. "If you hear a voice calling you from the dark, a voice you know, a voice you love, do not answer. If you answer, you invite them in." Before Robert could ask what they meant, the alarm screamed. "Security breach in the core." The automated voice of the station AI blared. "Sector 4. Engineering Team Alpha is offline." Sable dropped Robert's hand instantly. "Gray Banner, secure the exits," she roared. "Pierce, take the perimeter." Rowan Pierce, the captain of her personal guard, moved instantly. He was a massive wolf with fur, the color of iron filings. He shot Robert a look of pure, unadulterated loathing before drawing a kinetic rifle and charging toward the blast doors. "You," Sable pointed at Robert. "With me, now." She did not wait for an answer. She grabbed his shoulder and propelled him forward. They ran, not toward the exits, but toward the service lifts that led down to the engineering decks. The lift ride was a blur of flashing red lights. When the doors opened on the engineering level, the smell of burnt circuitry was overpowering. "Stay behind me," Sable ordered. She drew a jagged curved blade from her hip, a traditional weapon of her people, humming with an energy field. They moved through the smoke. The bodies of the engineering team were scattered across the floor. They were not dead, Robert realized with a surge of relief, but they were unconscious, slumped over their consoles, as if their strings had been cut. "Hypnotic pulse," Sable assessed. "Non-lethal. They want delays, not martyrs." Robert rushed to the main diagnostic panel. His hands flew over the controls. "The primary relay is gone," he said, his mind shifting into work mode. "Someone bypassed the safeties." He pointed to a charged socket in the wall. "Look." Painted on the metal casing above the destroyed component was a symbol in jagged white paint, a stylized wolf's head with a dagger through it. The mark of the White Mane, the radical faction of the wolf species that believed humanity was a plague to be eradicated. "Your people?" Robert asked, looking at Sable. Sable stared at the symbol. Her lip curled in a snarl. "White Mane. They want the Alliance to break. They want us to believe they did this." "They did do it," Robert said, gesturing to the paint. "The signature is right there." "No," Sable said. She stepped closer, examining the blast pattern. "White Mane use plasma charges. Clumsy, loud, honorable in their own twisted way. This," she ran a claw over the melted metal. "This was a focused ion cutter. Precision work. Military grade." Robert narrowed his eyes. He leaned in, ignoring the heat radiating from the console. He pulled a pair of microgoggles from his pocket and slid them on. He looked deep into the fried circuitry. "You are right," Robert whispered, "and it is worse." He reached in with a pair of insulated pliers and pulled out a small fused lump of metal. "This is not a standard relay. It is a decoy." He held it up to the flickering emergency light. "See this weaving? This is human tech, high-grade stealth coding. Someone replaced the real component with this fake one hours ago. The explosion was just to hide the swap." "So," Sable said, her voice dangerously calm, A human operative plants a device to sabotage the spire, then paints a wolf symbol to blame my people. And right in the middle of it, Robert realized the horror dawning on him. You claim a human as your husband. Exactly, Sable said. If I had not claimed you, Holt would have arrested you for this sabotage within the hour. You were the last one on the duty log. You are the perfect scapegoat. Robert dropped the piece of metal. It clanged loudly on the deck. You knew. I suspected, Sable corrected. I smelled the deception in the air, Robert. The politics on this station have been rotting for months. I needed a way to keep you out of a cell so you could actually fix this mess. So you married me, Robert shouted, waving his hands. That is your tactical solution, radical matrimony. It worked, Sable said flatly. She sheathed her sword. You are not in a brig. You are standing here useful. Useful, Robert repeated, bitter flavor of the word. Is that what husbands are for in your culture, spare parts? Husbands are partners, Sable said, and for a moment, the hard edge of her voice softened. They watch the blind spots. Suddenly the shadows in the corner of the room seemed to lengthen. Robert heard it, a faint whisper, soft as a breath against his ear. Robert, come home. It was his mother's voice. She had been dead for 20 years. He froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned toward the shadow. Robert, Sable barked. He blinked, snapping back to reality. Sable was in front of him, blocking his view of the corner. Do not, she warned. Dr. Reed was right. The spire is bleeding. The things that live in the gaps are leaking through. She tapped her comms unit. Pierce, Sector 4 is compromised. Evidence of false flag operation. I am taking the asset to the den. Why? The asset, Robert asked. I thought I was the husband. In public, you are the husband, Sable said, grabbing his arm again. In private, you are the only mechanic who can tell the difference between a bomb and a battery. I am taking you to my quarters. Your quarters, Robert balked as she dragged him toward the exit. Now, wait a minute. The ceremony was a sham. I am not sleeping in your bed. You will sleep on the floor if you have to, Sable said, pushing him through the doors. But you will stay where my guards can see you. If you wander off, you will be killed by a human spy to silence you, or by a white-maned fanatic to insult me. I do not have time to mourn a widow's grief tonight, Vance. They moved fast, taking back hallways that Robert did not know existed. They emerged in the wolf sector of the Ark. The aesthetic changed instantly. The cold steel was covered in hangings of woven intricate patterns. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage, artificial but comforting. Guards snapped to attention as Sable passed their fists, striking their chests. They looked at Robert with a mixture of confusion and intense scrutiny. Sable keyed the door to her personal suite. It slid open with a heavy thud. The room was sparse. A large, low bed covered in furs dominated one corner. A weapon rack dominated another. A massive window looked out directly at the spire. She shoved him inside and sealed the door. Make yourself comfortable, she said, pulling off her gauntlets and tossing them onto a table. Do not touch my weapons. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Pierce. This is kidnapping, Robert said, crossing his arms, with extra steps and better interior design. It is protective custody, Sable corrected. She turned to him and the exhaustion finally showed on her face. Her ears lowered slightly. Robert, listen to me. The spire is drifting. If it fails during the calibration tomorrow, the corridor collapses. Ravlin Ark will be crushed into a singularity the size of an apple. Humanity dies. My people die. She stepped closer, her height intimidating, but her presence strangely grounding. I do not want a husband, she said quietly. I want a future. And right now, you are the only one who sees the machine for what it is. I am not stealing your freedom. I am buying time for you to breathe. Before Robert could answer, the door chimed. "Enter," Sable commanded. Rowan Pierce stepped in. The gray wolf captain looked at Sable, then at Robert. He did not bow. "The perimeter is secure, Commander," Rowan said. His voice was a deep gravel. He turned his yellow eyes to Robert. "You?" "Me," Robert said, trying to look unimpressed. Rowan stepped into Robert's personal space. He smelled of rain and suppressed violence. "You wear the title of bondmate," Rowan growled. "It is a sacred word. If you make a mockery of it, if you shame her, or if you betray her to your human overlords." Rowan leaned down, his teeth bared inches from Robert's face. "I will not kill you," Rowan whispered. "I will leave you in the airlock with the outer door cracked open, and I will let the void take you apart one molecule at a time. I will demand the honor of her house back from your cold lungs." "Rowan," Sable warned. "Enough." Rowan straightened up, shot one last glare at Robert, and nodded to his commander. "I will stand guard outside." The door swished shut, leaving them alone. Sable sighed, rubbing her temples. "He is protective. Ignore him." "Hard to ignore a werewolf threatening to spacing me," Robert muttered. He walked over to the window. The spire was screaming now. Not a sound, but a visual scream. The light pulsing from it was erratic. The dark tear in the background was widening like ink spilling in water. Robert placed his hand against the cold glass. He felt the rhythm of the station. It was erratic, terrified. The machine was scared. He could feel it. He looked at his reflection in the glass. A tired man in a grease-stained suit. "So," Robert said to the reflection, "I am married." "Technically," Sable said from behind him. She was stripping off her heavy chestplate, revealing a black undersuit. "We need to finalize the biometrics in the morning to make it legal in the human courts. But for the pack, yes, you are mine." Robert turned to look at her. She looked smaller without the armor, but no less dangerous. She was watching him, waiting for him to break or scream or run. "You really think," Robert said, his voice soft, "that saying, 'touch me,' was the best way to handle that?" A ghost of a smile touched Sable's lips. It was sharp, but not cruel. "It got their attention," she said. Robert looked back out at the spire. The voices were there again at the edge of his hearing. Faint. Calling. "Robert, help us." He closed his eyes and focused on the vibration of the deck plates instead. He focused on the reality of the metal, the smell of the sage, the sound of Sable's breathing. He was a pawn on a board he did not understand. He was a husband to a woman he did not know. He was a mechanic on a station that was breaking apart. "Well," Robert whispered to the void, "I guess I am not complaining about the coffee today." He watched the spire pulse a rhythmic throb that felt like a countdown. One thing was certain. He had been drowning in the politics of the station for years, invisible and ignored. Now a wolf had pulled him out of the water by the scruff of his neck. He just had to figure out if she had pulled him onto a lifeboat or onto the altar of a sacrifice. "Get some sleep, Robert," Sable said, her voice blending with the low growl of the station. "Tomorrow the universe tries to kill us. I would like you to be awake for it." Robert nodded, but he did not move from the window. He watched the dark tear in the sky, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if the darkness was watching him back. The spire groaned, a sound of metal under torture, and the parade deck wedding felt like a fever dream compared to the nightmare waiting in the silence of space. "I am awake," Robert said. "I am wide awake." The quarters of the High Commander did not smell like a bedroom. They smelled like a storm trapped in a bottle. Robert Vance woke up on a pile of furs that cost more than his entire accumulative salary over 10 years. His back ached, not from the bedding, which was surprisingly supportive, but from the tension that had locked his muscles into steel cables while he slept. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. It was not the standard white polymer of the Coalition barracks. It was draped in heavy dark fabric woven with silver threads that seemed to catch the ambient light of the station and hold it hostage. He sat up. The room was empty, save for a suit of armor standing in the corner, like a silent sentinel. Then, the sound hit him. It started low, a rumble in the throat that vibrated through the floorboards, escalating into a mournful rising pitch that was half song, half warning. It was a howl, and it was coming from the refresher unit. Robert rubbed his face with both hands. "Too early," he muttered. "Way too early for wildlife documentaries." He rolled off the furs, his feet hitting the cold metal floor. He was still wearing the jumpsuit from yesterday now, wrinkled and smelling faintly of engine grease and fear. He walked to the door of the refresher unit and knocked on the frame. "Hey!" Robert called out. "Commander Sable!" The howling cut off instantly. A moment later, the door hissed open. Sable Arden stood there. She was wrapped in a simple robe of gray silk, damp from a sonic shower. Her fur was sleek, flattening against her skull, making her look less like a monster and more like a tired athlete. "You are awake," she said. Her voice was devoid of the theatrical command she used on the parade deck. "Good. We have schedule conflicts." "I have a conflict with the acoustics," Robert said, pointing a finger at the ceiling. "Look, if we are going to do this charade, we need ground rules. Rule number 1, I am a human engineer. I need coffee, I need silence in the morning, and I need you to not howl at the ventilation system while I am trying to remember who I am." Sable stared at him. She did not look offended. She looked confused. "I was not howling at the vents," she said, tightening the sash of her robe. "I was vocalizing the morning resonance to the spire. It is how my people synchronize with the station's cycle. If I do not greet it, the pack feels the dissonance." "You howl to the machine?" Robert asked. "I howl for the machine," she corrected. "It is scared, Robert. You said so yourself. It calms down when it hears the pack." Robert paused. He could feel it in his own teeth, the subtle, nauseating vibration of the spire running through the station's spine. It was erratic today, stuttering. "Fine," Robert conceded, lowering his hand. "But can we keep the volume down to a dull roar? My human ears are fragile." "Noted," Sable said. She walked past him, moving with a fluid grace that made him feel clumsy. "Get dressed. Not in that grease rag. There is a uniform on the table. We are going to the training deck." "Training?" Robert asked, eyeing the gray bundle on the table. "I fix engines. I do not spar." "You are the bondmate of the Gray Banner now," Sable said, pulling her armor from the stand. "You do not need to fight, but you need to smell like you can. If you walk through the corridors smelling like fear and hesitancy, my soldiers will lose respect. And when wolves lose respect, they bite." The training deck of the Gray Banner was a nightmare of rotating blades, holographic targets, and gravity wells that shifted every 30 seconds. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and exertion. Robert stood on the observation platform, wearing a charcoal gray tactical tunic that fit him surprisingly well. It was stiff at the collar and bore the insignia of the Wolf High Command, a silver dagger bisecting a crescent moon on the shoulder. He felt like an imposter. Sable was down in the pit. She moved like liquid shadow. She was sparring with 3 of her lieutenants, including the massive Rowan Pierce. It wasn't a fight. It was a conversation of violence. Sable ducked a plasma staff, swept Rowan's legs, and used the momentum to flip over the 3rd attacker, landing in a crouch that was terrifyingly perfect. She signaled a halt and looked up at Robert. "Come down," she ordered. Robert hesitated, then took the stairs. The soldiers parted for him, their eyes tracking his every movement. They didn't bow, but they didn't growl either. It was a terrifying middle ground. "I am not fighting you," Robert said as he reached the mat. "I value my limbs attached to my torso." "Hold out your hand," Sable said. When he did, she didn't strike him. She produced a small silver device that looked like a needle. Before he could pull back, she pricked his finger. A single drop of red blood welled up. "Ow," Robert said flatly. Sable pressed the device against her own palm, drawing a drop of her darker, almost violet blood. She mixed them on a small sensor pad on the wall. The console chimed a harsh, guttural sound. "What was that?" Robert asked, nursing his finger. "Bioacoustic oath registration," Sable said casually. "In your culture, you sign papers to prove loyalty. In ours, we mix genetic markers in the presence of a neuroscent recorder. That console just broadcasted your scent signature to every armor suit in the battalion." Robert looked at the console, horrified. "You emailed my smell to your army." "Essentially," Sable said. "Now their targeting systems will register you as Pac Prime. Friendly fire is impossible. You could walk through a firing squad and their guns would lock up before they could pull the trigger." "That is incredibly invasive," Robert said, though he felt a strange knot of tension loosen in his chest. "And also practical." "We are pragmatic creatures," Sable said. She leaned in close, her voice dropping. "It also means that if you betray us, every nose on this station will know it before you even reach the airlock." "Comforting," Robert said. "Truly heartwarming." "Commander!" The shout came from the medical bay entrance. A female wolf with fur the color of dried wheat jogged over. She wore a medical apron over her armor. This was Aster Vale, the chief medic of the Grey Banner. "We need the asset for the baseline scan," Aster said, looking at Robert with bright, curious eyes. She didn't look at him like a soldier looking at a target. She looked at him like a scientist looking at a fascinating, possibly explosive lab specimen. "Go with Aster," Sable nodded to Robert. "She needs to ensure your human physiology isn't rejecting the stress of the spire's proximity." The medical bay was quieter, bathed in soothing blue light. Aster Vale pushed Robert onto a biobed that felt too hard for human comfort. "Relax," Aster said, her claws tapping rapidly on a holographic interface. "I promise not to bite. Unless you are delicious." "Are you delicious?" "I am high in cholesterol and anxiety," Robert said, staring at the ceiling scanner. "You would get indigestion." Aster laughed a short, barking sound. "Funny." "I like him, Commander. He has a defense mechanism that involves jokes." She ran a scanner over his chest. The machine hummed, then gave a sharp, discordant beep. Aster frowned. She tapped the console, reset it, and scanned him again. "That is odd," she murmured. "What?" Robert asked, sitting up slightly. "Do I have space plague? Is my heart giving out?" "No," Aster said, her ears twitching. She turned the screen so he could see. "Look at the waveform. The top line is your heartbeat. The bottom line is the ambient resonance frequency of the spire." Robert looked. The two lines were identical. They rose and fell in perfect synchronization. When the spire's line spiked, Robert's heart rate jumped. When the spire dipped, his pulse slowed. "You are synced," Aster said, looking at him with wide eyes. "Usually, the spire creates interference that makes humans nauseous. But you are acting like a biological capacitor. You are absorbing the excess resonance." "Is that good?" Robert asked. "It explains why you are so good at fixing it," Aster said, her tone serious now. "You feel what it feels." "But Robert, this is dangerous. If the spire crashes, your heart might stop out of sympathy." She poked him in the chest with a claw, gentle but firm. "You are a battery little human. A battery that feels guilty for the machine." Before Robert could process the fact that his cardiovascular system was apparently married to a giant space antenna, the station shook. It wasn't the spire this time. It was an explosion. The lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by spinning red emergency strobes. Sector 9, the intercom screamed. Power coupling failure. Fire suppression active. Robert slid off the table. Sector 9. That is the main conduit for the portside weaponry. Sable burst into the medical bay a second later. Report. Explosion in the conduit, Astor replied, grabbing a medkit. Casualties unconfirmed. It was not an accident, Robert said, his mind racing. I checked those couplings yesterday. They were at 100% integrity. Then we are under attack, Sable said. She looked at Robert. Stay here. No, Robert said. He grabbed the datapad Astor had been using. I need to see the telemetry. If someone blew that coupling, they did it to blind the sensors on that side of the ship. Sable hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Move. Stay close to Rowan. An hour later, they were in the war room. The atmosphere was so thick with tension, it felt like walking through water. Captain Miriam Holt sat at the head of the table, looking like she had aged 10 years in a single morning. Opposite her sat Director Garrick Hale. Hale was a man who looked like he had been manufactured, not born. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed, and his smile did not reach his eyes. He was the architect of the Spire project, the man representing Earth's interests, and Robert had never trusted him. The evidence is clear, Hale said, sliding a data chip across the table. Fragments of a detonator found at the blast site. The chemical signature matches explosives used by the human first splinter groups. Sable stood by the window, arms crossed. Robert stood slightly behind her, conscious of the eyes in the room. So, Sable said, her voice ice-cold, you are telling me that human extremists blew up a power line to blind my ships? It appears they want to provoke you, Commander, Hale said smoothly. They want the Gray Banner to retaliate. If you strike back at human civilians, the Alliance collapses. They win. Captain Holt rubbed her temples. We are locking down the human sectors, Commander Arden. We will find them. And while you look, Hale added, his eyes sliding over to Robert. Perhaps it is best if Mr. Vance is kept in secure isolation. If these extremists know he has allied himself with the wolves, he is a primary target. Robert felt the trap closing. Hale wasn't trying to protect him. He was trying to remove him from the board. My husband, Sable said, stressing the word, stays with me. It is a security risk, Hale insisted. He is a civilian. He is wolf by bond. Sable stepped forward, placing her hands on the table. And in my culture, we do not hide our mates in bunkers while we hunt. He stands where I stand. Robert looked around the room. The human officers were looking at him with suspicion, a traitor who joined the aliens. The wolf guards were looking at him with doubt, a soft human who would get their commander killed. He needed to speak. The detonator, Robert said. Hale blinked. Excuse me. The detonator you found, Robert said, stepping out from behind Sable. You said it matches human first signatures. How much of it was left? Fragments, Hale said dismissively. Enough for a chemical analysis. That is the problem, Robert said. Human first uses ammonium-based compounds. They burn dirty. They leave residue everywhere. But the explosion in Sector 9, Robert pointed to the schematic on the wall screen. Look at the blast radius. It is clean, surgical. It sheared the metal. It didn't melt it. He looked directly at Hale. That wasn't a terrorist bomb. That was a shaped charge using military-grade plasma gel, the kind used by station security. Silence descended on the room. Hale's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Are you implying something, Mr. Vance? I am implying that the evidence is too convenient, Robert said. And I am implying that someone wants us to look at the who so we do not look at the why. And what is the why? Holt asked. The explosion blinded the port sensors, Robert said. For 3 minutes, the spire was unmonitored on its western flank, long enough to hide a signal transmission. Sable looked at Robert, and for the first time there was no calculation in her eyes, only a flash of genuine pride. "We will review the sensor logs," Captain Holt said, standing up. Meeting adjourned. As they left the war room, the corridors felt tighter, more claustrophobic. "You have a big mouth," Sable murmured as they walked. "I have a functional brain," Robert countered. "Hale is lying. You know it." "I know it," Sable said, "but knowing it and proving it are different. He is baiting us. He wants me to attack him so he can claim victimhood." They turned a corner, into the long, glass-walled corridor that led back to the spire control deck. It was Robert's favorite view. The stars looked clearer here. But today, the shadows were wrong. Down. The roar came from behind them. Rowan Pierce launched himself through the air, tackling Robert to the ground, just as the air where Robert's head had been sizzled with the passage of a high-velocity slug. Sable had her sword out before the sound of the shot even registered. She deflected a second shot with the flat of the blade, the energy field crackling. "Ambush!" Rowan bellowed, shielding Robert with his massive armored body. 3 figures dropped from the maintenance vents in the ceiling. They were clad in stealth suits that shimmered, making them hard to look at directly. They didn't move like humans or wolves. They moved like machines. Sable engaged 2 of them. It was a blur of violence. Her blade met their shock batons with a shower of sparks. She moved with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold, a whirlwind of claws and steel. Rowan was fighting the 3rd one, using his brute strength to smash the assassin against the bulkhead. Robert lay on the floor, heart hammering. He saw one of the assassins break away from Sable, raising a pistol, aimed directly at her exposed back. "Sable!" Robert screamed. He didn't think. He grabbed a loose, metal panel that had been knocked free in the scuffle and threw it. It was a pathetic projectile, but it clanged loudly against the assassin's helmet. The distraction was enough. The assassin turned his head for a fraction of a second. Sable spun her sword, taking the assassin's legs out. She followed with a strike that disabled the power pack on his suit. The remaining assassins, realizing the element of surprise was gone, tapped their belts. A flash of blinding light erupted, a tactical strobe. When Robert blinked the spots from his eyes, the corridor was empty of enemies. Only Sable, Rowan, and Robert remained. Sable was breathing hard, a shallow cut on her cheek, oozing violet blood. She walked over to Robert, grabbed him by the front of his tunic, and hauled him to his feet. "Are you hurt?" she demanded. "No," Robert stammered. "I think I'm okay." She stared at him, scanning him for injuries. Then she let him go and turned to Rowan. "Secure the area. No one enters or leaves." Rowan nodded, but before he moved, he grabbed Robert's arm. His grip was bruising. "You threw a piece of scrap metal," Rowan growled. "It was all I had," Robert defended himself. Rowan stared at him, the yellow eyes unblinking. "It was stupid, but it bought her a second." The wolf leaned in his voice, dropping to a rumble that vibrated in Robert's bones. "Listen to me, human. You live because she chose you. She is making herself a target to keep you breathing. Do not make that a waste." Rowan released him and stalked off. Robert leaned against the wall, his legs shaking. He really needs to work on his bedside manner. They retreated to a secondary command post, a smaller room, deep in the wolf sector. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Robert cold and exhausted. In the corner of the room, a young wolf soldier was curled up on a crate. He was shaking his hands over his ears. He couldn't have been more than 18 in human years. "Make it stop," the soldier was whimpering. "The voice sounds like my brother. He is calling me from the dark." It was the veil phenomenon, the psychic bleed-through from the spire's instability. Robert watched, expecting Sable to reprimand the soldier for weakness. Instead, Sable knelt. She removed her gauntlets. She took the young soldier's hands in hers and pulled them away from his ears. She spoke not in the common tongue, but in the low, rhythmic language of the wolves. It sounded like a song, deep and vibrating. She pressed her forehead against the soldiers. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply anchored him. She breathed with him until his breathing matched hers. "The dark lies, Qual," she said softly and common so Robert could understand. "Your brother is honored in the memory of the pack. He is not in the cold. Do not let the shadows use his voice." The soldier nodded, tears in his eyes, but the shaking stopped. "Yes, Commander." Robert watched from the doorway, a lump in his throat. He had seen her as a warrior, a politician, and a commander. But he hadn't seen this. Sable stood up and walked over to Robert. She saw the look on his face. "Do not look at me like that," she said, wiping the blood from her cheek. "Like what?" "Like I am kind," she said. "I am maintaining the efficiency of my unit. A frightened soldier is a liability." "You can call it logistics if you want," Robert said quietly. "But I know what compassion looks like, even when it is wearing armor." Sable sighed. She leaned back against the console, looking suddenly very small against the vastness of the star map behind her. "Robert," she said, "I do not need you to love me. I know this arrangement is a cage for you. I know you want to be back in your engine room with your coffee and your quiet life." She looked at him, her golden eyes fierce and honest. "I only ask that you do not betray me out there. The world is hungry for a reason to tear us apart. If we show them a crack, they will drive a wedge in it that will shatter everything." Robert looked at her. He thought about the explosion, the ambush, the way she had put her body between him and the assassins. He thought about Hale's cold smile. "I was angry," Robert admitted. "When you announced the bond, I felt like I was being used." "You were," Sable said bluntly. "But," Robert continued, stepping closer, "if you hadn't done it, Hale would have buried me in a black site by now, wouldn't he?" Sable didn't answer, which was answer enough. "You didn't just marry me to fix the spire," Robert realized. "You did it because you knew I was the only human who actually gave a damn about the machine, and they were going to kill me for it." He looked at his hand where the prick from the blood oath had already healed. "I am still mad about the howling," Robert said, "and the kidnapping, but I am not going anywhere." Sable looked at him surprised. "Is that a promise?" "It is a diagnostic assessment," Robert said, managing a weak smile. "System integrity is holding, for now." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He stood by the window in Sable's quarters. Sable was asleep on the furs, her breathing slow and deep. The spire was agonizingly bright tonight. Robert pressed his hand to the glass. Thump. His heart skipped a beat. Thump, thump. The spire pulsed. A massive, discordant ripple of light shot up the length of the column. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a hiccup in reality. The room spun. Suddenly, Robert wasn't on the Ravelin Arc. He was standing in a field. The grass was tall and violet, swaying in a wind that smelled of salt and ozone. The sky was a bruised purple, and two moons hung heavy and low. It was silent, peaceful. Then he saw it. In the distance, a structure that looked exactly like the spire, but ancient, overgrown with vines, its light dim but steady. And standing at the base of the spire was a figure, a wolf, but not in armor. It was wearing robes of white light. It turned to look at him. "Come," the voice said, not in his ears but in his blood. "We are waiting," Robert gasped and stumbled back, the vision shattered. He was back in the quarters. He had fallen to his knees, gasping for air. Sable was there instantly, her hand on his shoulder, her sword in her other hand. "Robert!" she demanded. "What happened? Did you feel a surge?" Robert looked up at her, sweat dripping down his face. His heart was racing, not with fear but with a strange, impossible recognition. "I saw it," Robert whispered. "I saw a place, a meadow." "A meadow," Sable frowned. There are no meadows in space, Robert. I know, Robert said, clutching his chest, where his heart hammered a rhythm that wasn't his own. But the spire remembers it. He looked out at the twisting dark tear in the sky. We are not just fixing a machine, Sable, Robert said, his voice trembling. I think we are opening a door. And, for the first time looking into the void, Robert Vance didn't feel like a mechanic. He felt like a key. The laboratory of the spire was not a place of sterile white walls and bright lights. It was a cavern of shadows and blue bioluminescence buried deep within the armored shell of the Ravelin Ark. The air here was kept at a freezing temperature to optimize the conductivity of the resonance crystals, meaning every breath Robert took bloomed in front of him like a small, vanishing ghost. Robert Vance rubbed his arms through the thick fabric of his thermal jacket. He stood before a bank of monitors that climbed 20 feet into the air, displaying cascading waterfalls of data that looked less like code and more like a chaotic sheet of rain. Beside him stood Dr. Cassian Reed. The scientist looked like a bird of prey perched on a ledge, his eyes darting across the screens with an intensity that bordered on mania. Look at the variance, Dr. Reed said, his voice barely rising above the hum of the cooling fans. Sector 4. Timestamp 0400. Robert squinted. I see it. A harmonic fluctuation of 0.05%. It is negligible, Doctor. A rounding error. Is it? Reed tapped a key and the screen zoomed in. The data resolved into a wave pattern. Look at the shape, Mr. Vance. Mechanical interference creates a jagged sawtooth wave. Electrical surges create a spike. But this, Robert leaned in. The wave was smooth. It rolled gently like a heartbeat. Or a breath. It is organic, Robert whispered. It is responsive, Reed corrected. He turned to face Robert, his back to the massive glowing column of the spire's primary node, visible through the reinforced glass behind them. For 50 years we have treated the spire as a machine, a very complex, very dangerous antenna. But machines do not care about intent. Machines do not care about promises. You are losing me, Doctor, Robert said, stepping back slightly. Are you telling me the antenna has feelings? I am telling you that the spire anchors the corridor by projecting a field of stability, Reed said, and that field reacts to the psychic resonance of the sentient beings nearby. Why do you think the wolves use oaths? Why do you think they ritualize their shifts? Robert looked at Sable, who was standing in the shadows by the door, her arms crossed, watching them with unreadable golden eyes. I thought it was just pageantry, Robert admitted. Wolf culture. High drama. It is engineering, Reed said flatly. The spire stabilizes when it detects a unified, resolute intent. It destabilizes when it detects fear, deception, or fragmentation. And last night, when you two stood on that stage and declared a bond, Reed pointed to the screen. The resonance efficiency jumped by 12% in a single second, the doctor revealed. The machine heard you. It liked the lie. It was not a lie. Sable's voice cut through the cold air. She stepped into the light. It was a tactical imperative. There is truth in necessity. Robert looked between them. So, you are saying the station is listening to us, like a wiretap? No, Reed said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The spire is not the one listening. The spire is just the microphone. Something else is on the receiver. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down Robert's spine. He remembered the voice from the void, the voice of his mother. The veil, Sable said. She used the word like a curse. Explain it, Robert demanded. And do not give me the mythology version. Give me the version that keeps me alive. Sable walked over to the viewport. Outside, the great crystal pillar pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. The corridor we guard is not just empty space, Sable said. It is a scar in reality. When you travel through it, you are skimming the surface of a depth that has no bottom. My people call the entities that live in that depth the veil. They do not have bodies. They have hunger. She turned to Robert. They feed on connection. They scan your mind for the strongest bonds you have, love, grief, regret, and they mimic them. They use the voices of the dead to get you to open the door. Robert felt his mouth go dry. Dr. Reed told me not to answer. He said if I answer, I invite them in. It is not superstition, Sable confirmed. It is a rule of engagement. If you engage with the hallucination, if you accept it as real, your mind synchronizes with their frequency. You become a bridge. And once the bridge is open, they can cross over. Robert looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. So, when I heard my mother... It was a knock on the door, Sable said gently. And if you had opened it, the spire would have amplified that breach. The station would have become a tomb. The silence in the lab was heavy. Robert looked at the massive machine with a new kind of fear. It wasn't just a piece of technology anymore. It was a dam holding back an ocean of predators. We need to test it, Dr. Reed said, breaking the silence. Mr. Vance, I need you to interface with the manual control board. I need to see if your unique physiology allows you to dampen the fluctuations manually. You want me to touch it? Robert asked. After telling me it is a doorbell for space ghosts. We have to know, Sable said. If the calibration fails tomorrow, we need a manual override. You might be the only one who can do it without being compromised. Robert sighed. Fine. But if I get possessed, I expect a very heartfelt apology. He walked to the central console. It was a slab of obsidian-like material, smooth and cold. He hesitated, his hand hovering inches above the surface. Clear your mind, Sable instructed. Do not think of fear. Think of purpose. Think of fixing something broken. Robert closed his eyes. He thought of an engine humming perfectly. He thought of the satisfaction of a circuit closing. He thought of the warmth of coffee on a cold morning. He pressed his hand down. The reaction was instant. It wasn't an electric shock. It was a wave of emotion that crashed into him, panic confusion, a vast, terrified screaming of metal and light. The spire was terrified. It felt like a child lost in the dark. Quiet Robert thought, pushing his own calm into the interface. It is okay. I am here. We are just adjusting the idle speed. Easy. He visualized his hands turning a wrench, smoothing out a rough idle. He felt the machine push back, erratic and sharp, but he held firm. He didn't fight it. He guided it. Steady, he thought. Just breathe. The screaming in his head faded. The erratic vibration under his feet smoothed out into a low, steady purr. The lights in the lab stopped flickering and settled into a warm, constant blue. Robert opened his eyes. He was gasping for air, sweat dripping down his nose. Dr. Reed was staring at the monitor, his mouth slightly open. Impossible. Variance is down to 0.001%. You didn't just dampen it. You comforted it. Robert pulled his hand back. He felt drained, as if he had run 10 miles. It is scared, Robert rasped. The machine. It knows something is coming. From the shadows near the entrance, a low growl of approval sounded. Robert turned to see Rowan Pierce standing there. The massive wolf captain was not looking at Robert with his usual disdain. He was looking at him with a strange, grudging respect. You have the touch of a pack leader. Rowan said, his voice deep. You do not break the will of the beast. You guide it. I am just a mechanic, Rowan, Robert said, leaning against the console for support. No, Rowan said, stepping forward. A mechanic fixes parts. You fix the spirit. The commander chose well. It was the first time Rowan had acknowledged him as anything other than a liability. Robert felt a strange flush of pride, quickly followed by a wave of nausea. I need to sit down, Robert said. They returned to Sable's quarters an hour later. The mood had shifted. The revelation in the lab had stripped away some of the pretense. They were not just playing house anymore. They were co-pilots on a sinking ship, Sable dismissed the guards at the door and turned to Robert. She looked exhausted. The armor she wore seemed heavier than usual. "You did well," she said, removing her gauntlets and placing them on the rack. "Better than I expected." "I felt it, Sable," Robert said, sitting on the edge of the large bed because there were no chairs. "I felt the spire. It is being hunted. The veil isn't just passive. It is pushing against the hull." "I know," she said. She walked to a small cabinet and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. She handed one to him. "Drink. It is medicinal." "It helps ground the nerves." Robert took the glass. "You knew about the spire's sentience. Why didn't you tell the council? Why didn't you tell Holt?" "Because humans panic," Sable said, taking a sip. "If the coalition knew the spire was influenced by emotion, they would try to control it with drugs and conditioning. They would turn it into a weapon, and that would shatter the resonance." "So you took the burden on yourself," Robert said. "You and your wolves, howling at the moon to keep the galaxy safe." "It is our duty," she said simply. "And where do I fit in?" Robert stood up, the alcohol forgotten. "Am I just another tool, a bioadapter you plugged in because you needed a human fuse?" Sable froze. She lowered her glass slowly. "Is that what you think?" "What else am I supposed to think?" Robert's voice rose. "You kidnapped me. You married me without asking. You threw me in front of an army and said he is mine. You stripped me of my name and gave me a title. I am Robert Vance Sable. I am a person. I am not a component you can just install." "I did not make you a component," Sable snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She spun around, her eyes blazing. "I made you a target." The silence that followed was deafening. Sable took a breath, her chest heaving. "Director Hale was going to erase you, Robert. Not arrest you, erase you. I saw the order. Asset Vance is a security risk. Liquidate and scrub the logs." She stepped closer, invading his personal space, her scent of rain and ozone overwhelming him. "I had 3 minutes to make a decision," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I could let you die and keep my honor clean. Or I could claim you, drag you into the mud of my politics, make you hated by half the station, and keep you breathing." She looked down at him, her expression raw. "I am selfish, Robert. I admit it. But I would rather have you hate me alive than mourn you as a ghost." Robert stared at her, stared at. The anger in his chest didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It turned into something heavier, something more complicated. "You should have given me the choice," Robert said softly. "There was no time for choice," Sable said. She turned away, hiding her face. "And I could not watch another good thing be swallowed by the dark." Robert stood there, looking at her back. He realized then that she was terrified. The unbreakable commander, Arden, the wolf of the Gray Banner, was terrified of losing things. "I do not hate you," Robert said. Sable's ear twitched. "I am incredibly annoyed," Robert clarified. "And I am confused, and I am scared stiff. But I do not hate you." He took a sip of the drink. It tasted like cinnamon and fire. "But if we are going to survive this," Robert said, "no more secrets. If I am your husband, even a fake one, I need to know who is holding the knife." Sable turned back. She walked to the console on her desk and keyed in a sequence. A holographic display projected into the air. "This is the security log for the night the spire began to destabilize," she said. "Look at the access signature." Robert looked. It was a complex encryption key, but the metadata tag was clear. Authorization, Director G. Hale. Project Oversight. "Hale," Robert breathed. "He accessed the core directly." "He authorized a shutdown protocol," Sable said. "He lowered the shields on the logic gate. He let the interference in on purpose." "Why?" Robert asked. "He lives here. If the spire falls, he dies too." "Not if he thinks he can control it," Sable said. Hale believes that fear is the only way to unite humanity. If the spire fails, the wolves will be blamed. The alliance will shatter. Humanity will rally behind a strong leader who promises to secure the borders. He wants a war, Robert, and he is willing to break the universe to get it. He is insane, Robert said. He is ambitious, Sable corrected. Which is worse? The door chimed. It was Captain Miriam Holt. She looked frazzled, her uniform rumpled. I am off the record, Holt said as she stepped in. If anyone asks, I am in my quarters sleeping. Captain, Sable asked. I saw the logs, Holt said, pulling a data chip from her pocket. Hale is moving funds, massive amounts. He is paying off mercenaries in the Outer Rim. And he has authorized a containment protocol for tomorrow's ceremony. What does that mean? Robert asked. Holt looked at him with grim eyes. It means if the calibration goes wrong even by a fraction of a percent, he has the authority to vent the parade deck, to kill everyone present to contain the anomaly. He is going to kill the Wolf High Command, Sable realized, her claws extending involuntarily. And you, Holt added. And me. And anyone else who stands in his way. Holt handed the chip to Robert. This contains the override codes for the venting system. But they are encrypted. I cannot crack them. I am a soldier, not a hacker. I can crack them, Robert said, taking the chip. But I need time, and I need a terminal that isn't monitored. Use the one in here, Sable said. It is isolated from the main network. Holt nodded. Be fast. Hale is moving up the schedule. The ceremony starts in 12 hours. She turned to leave, then paused. Robert, be careful. Hale knows you are the variable he didn't account for. He will come for you. Let him come, Sable growled. After Holt left, the room felt smaller. The weight of the impending betrayal hung in the air. Robert sat at the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. Sable paced behind him, a restless shadow. You need to rest, Robert said without looking back. You have a ceremony tomorrow. You need to look imperious and terrifying. I cannot sleep, Sable said. The silence is too loud. Robert stopped typing. He swiveled the chair around. Show me, he said. Show you what? The thing you do, Robert said. The howling. You said it was a way to talk to the machine. But it is more than that, isn't it? It is how you keep yourself sane. Sable looked at him guarded. It is private. It is not for human ears. You would find it primitive. I am married to a werewolf warlord in space, Robert said. I think we passed primitive 3 days ago. Show me. Sable hesitated. Then she walked to the window facing the spire. She reached up and unclasped the collar of her tunic, exposing her throat. She didn't howl like a wolf. She began to hum. It started deep in her chest, a resonance that Robert could feel in the floorboards. It rose, layering over itself, a complex multitonal sound that was mournful and beautiful. It wasn't a song of aggression, it was a song of grief. It sounded like the wind blowing through a canyon of glass. It was a sound that said, I am here. I am watching, I am holding the line. Robert listened, mesmerized. He realized he was hearing her soul. He was hearing the weight of every soldier she had lost, every difficult order she had given, every fear she hid behind her armor. The sound tapered off into a soft, vibrating silence. Sable stood still, her shoulders heaving slightly. She didn't turn around. She was ashamed, he realized. She felt exposed. Robert stood up and walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He sensed she was too fragile for that right now. He stood beside her, looking out at the stars. That sounded like a D minor chord, Robert said softly, with a suspended fourth. Sable glanced at him sideways. You are analyzing the musical theory of my soul. I am a tech, Robert shrugged. I analyze things. but it was beautiful. He smiled a little. Though honestly, it sounded a bit like you were trying to give me the Wi-Fi password for the universe. Sable blinked. Then a sound escaped her throat. A short, sharp exhalation. A laugh. A real one. You are impossible, she said, shaking her head. I try, Robert said. You know, if you ever need to broadcast that again, I do not mind. It is better than the silence. Sable turned to him fully. The golden eyes were soft. Do not share that sound, Robert. It is my true name, in the old tongue. I won't, Robert promised. I keep secrets better than I keep my temper. I know, Sable said. She reached out and for the first time initiated a gentle touch. She brushed a piece of lint off his shoulder. Thank you. The moment was broken by a beep from the terminal. Got it, Robert said, rushing back to the screen. Decryption complete. Wait, he frowned. This isn't right. What is it? Sable asked, instantly alert. The component, Robert said, pulling up the schematic of the spire's core. The fake relay we found yesterday. The one Hale planted to distract us. Yes, the sabotage. It wasn't just sabotage, Robert said, his eyes widening. Look at the energy flow. That relay sits on the secondary power bus. It controls the lights, the environmental systems, the door locks. So why would Hale risk a massive explosion just to knock out the lights? Robert tapped the screen furiously. Unless he wanted us to look at the power bus so we wouldn't look at the frequency modulator. He brought up a new diagram. The spire's heart. It is gone, Robert whispered. What is gone? The rhyme core, Robert said, pointing to a blank space in the schematic. It is a crystal matrix about the size of a fist. It regulates the rhythm of the spire. Without it, the station cannot navigate the drift. It is flying blind. If the rhyme core is missing, Sable said, her voice turning horrified, then the calibration ceremony tomorrow. Is a suicide run, Robert finished. Without that core, when we try to sync with the spire, the energy won't have anywhere to go. It will feed back into the station. It will kill us, Sable said. It will not just vent the deck. It will overload the neural systems of everyone present. It will fry our brains. That is Hale's plan, Robert said, standing up. He stole the core. He planted the fake bomb to make us fix the wrong thing. He wants us to walk onto that stage, start the ceremony, and burn ourselves out from the inside. Then he blames the instability of the alien tech takes over and uses the disaster to declare martial law. Sable grabbed her sword belt. We have to stop the ceremony. We cannot, Robert said. If we cancel, the spire destabilizes naturally in 48 hours. We are trapped. Then we find the core, Sable said. Where is it? If I were Hale, Robert said, looking at the tracking data. And I wanted to control the most powerful weapon in the sector, I wouldn't hide it. I would keep it close. He pointed to a signal blip, located in the high-security diplomatic suite. He has it in his room, Robert said. He is sleeping with it. Sable's eyes narrowed into slits. Then we are going to pay the director a visit. And Robert, yeah. Bring your tools, she said, a feral grin touching her lips. We might need to break some things. Robert grabbed his kit. He looked at the woman standing in the center of the room, a warrior who sang her grief to the stars, a commander who married a mechanic to save his life. I am ready, Robert said. And for the first time since this madness began, he realized he wasn't just following orders. He was choosing the fight. Let's go steal back the heartbeat of the station, he said. They moved toward the door, leaving the warmth of the quarters behind. Outside, the spire pulsed a jagged, uneven rhythm, like a heart in arrhythmia, waiting for the surgery that would either save it or stop it forever. The ambient lighting on the Ravelin arc had been shifted to a deep bruising crimson. It was the standard protocol for a level 3 atmospheric hazard, but to Robert Vance, It looked like the station was bleeding from the inside out. Outside the reinforced viewports, the universe was throwing rocks. A micro-meteor shower, the debris field from a passing comet, was peppering the station's shields. Every impact resulted in a dull, resonant thud that vibrated through the hull plates, a rhythmic counterpoint to the sickening, syncopated whine of the spire. It was the night before the great calibration, the night the station was supposed to learn to scream. Robert stood in the medical triage center of the gray banner sector. It was chaotic, but silent. There was no shouting, only the hurried movement of medics and the soft, terrified whimpers of soldiers who were holding their heads, trying to keep the voices out. "Take it," Dr. Astorvale said, shoving a small paper cup into Robert's hand. Inside was a single blue pill. "What is it?" Robert asked, looking at the pill with suspicion. "It looks like the same stuff you give the wolves for motion sickness." "It is a neural dampener," Astor said. She looked exhausted. Her ears were flattened against her skull, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "It thickens the synaptic fluid in the auditory cortex. It makes the hallucinations quieter, less persuasive." Robert looked around the room. A young wolf soldier was strapped to a bed, thrashing against the restraints, screaming a name that sounded like Mika. "He is hearing his dead sister," Astor whispered, following Robert's gaze. "The spire is acting as a signal booster for the veil. The closer we get to the calibration window, the thinner the walls of reality become. Take the pill, Robert. You are sensitive. If the spire speaks to you tonight, you might walk out an airlock before you realize you are holding your breath." Robert hesitated. He looked at the pill, then at his own trembling hand. He could hear it already, a low, static fuzz at the back of his mind like a radio, tuned between stations. "No," Robert said, handing the cup back. "Do not be an idiot." Astor snapped her claws, clicking against the plastic cup. "This is not the time for human bravado." "It is not bravado," Robert said, his voice low. "It is diagnostics. I need to hear the spire, Astor. I need to know the difference between the machine crying for help and the ghosts trying to break in. If I numb myself, I am just a mechanic with a wrench. Tonight I need to be—" "A lightning rod," Astor suggested dryly. "Something like that," Robert said. "Just keep an eye on me. If I start trying to open a window, feel free to tranquilize me." Astor stared at him for a long moment, then sighed, crushing the cup in her hand. "Fine, but if your brain melts, I am not filling out the paperwork. It is too long." The plan was simple, which meant, in Robert's experience, it was doomed to fail spectacularly. They had split their forces. A decoy team led by a holographic projection of Sable and Robert was currently making a noisy, high-profile inspection of the secondary coolant loops. It was a parade designed to draw eyes. The real team, Sable, Robert, and Rowan Pierce, was moving through the maintenance crawlspaces, heading toward the diplomatic spire where Director Garrick Hale resided. The crawlspace was cramped, smelling of recycled air and old grease. Robert crawled behind Sable, watching the way her armor shifted silently with her movements. Rowan brought up the rear, a massive silent shadow that blocked out the red emergency lights. "Stop," Rowan whispered. They froze. "Patrol," Rowan signaled with a subtle hand movement. Through the grating of the floor, Robert could see a squad of station security guards, humans, marching past. They were heavily armed, their faces obscured by tactical visors. "Hale has doubled the guard rotation," Sable whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation fans. "He knows we are coming. Or he is paranoid." "Paranoia is a prerequisite for his job description," Robert muttered. Rowan shifted his armor, scraping softly against the metal wall. He looked at Robert. In the red light, the wolf's yellow eyes were unsettlingly intense. "Human," Rowan said. It was the first time he hadn't used the word like a slur. "Robert," Robert corrected automatically. "My name is Robert." Rowan ignored the correction. "The voices. You hear them without the dampener?" A little, Robert admitted. It sounds like a party happening in the apartment next door. Murmuring. Indistinct. Mine is distinct, Rowan rumbled. He looked down at his massive hands. I hear my first pack leader, the one I failed to save during the rebellion of the 3 moons. He is telling me that my honor is a lie. Robert looked at the terrifying warrior and saw the cracks in the stone. It is not him, Rowan. It is just a recording. A remix of your worst day. I know what it is, Rowan snarled softly. Then he looked Robert in the eye. Are you scared? Robert paused. He felt the vibration of the deck plates against his knees. He felt the cold sweat on his back. I am terrified, Robert said honestly. I am scared that the spire is going to turn us all into dust. I am scared that Hale is going to win. I am scared that I am going to hear my mother's voice, and I am going to be weak enough to answer. Rowan watched him waiting. But Robert continued tightening his grip on his toolkit. I hate being manipulated more than I hate being dead. Hale is trying to play us like instruments. I refuse to be played. Rowan's ears twitched forward. A low huff of air escaped his nose, almost a laugh. Stubborn. You have the stubbornness of a badger. It is a small animal, but very annoying to kill. I will take that as a compliment, Robert said. Clear, Sable signaled from the front. Move. They reached the junction that led to the service entrance of the diplomatic suite. It was a narrow corridor, lined with power conduits. Suddenly, the world turned white. The spire let out a breath. It wasn't a sound. It was a psychic shockwave. The red emergency lights flared brilliant white, then blew out, completely plunging the corridor into absolute darkness. Simultaneously, the gravity plating flickered. Robert felt his stomach lurch as he floated weightless for 2 seconds, then slammed back down onto the deck as gravity returned at 150% capacity before normalizing. Stay down, Sable hissed. In the darkness, the voices roared. Robert, my sweet boy, come here. It is so cold. It was not a murmur anymore. It was right in his ear. The smell of lavender and antiseptic filled his nose. The smell of the hospital room where his mother had died. Robert gasped, clutching his head. No, you are not real. I am real, Robbie. I am right outside. Just open the lock. Just let me in. He saw her. In the darkness, a figure formed out of static and shadow. She was standing by the conduit, wearing her hospital gown, reaching out to him. Mom, Robert whispered. His hand reached out involuntarily. The logical part of his brain was screaming, it is a trap, but the emotional part, the part that had been grieving for 20 years, was taking control. He began to crawl toward the shadow. I am here. I am coming. That is it, come to me. The shadow's face twisted, the mouth opening too wide, revealing a darkness that had no end. Slap. The impact was sharp and stinging. Robert's head snapped to the side. He blinked. The lavender scent vanished, replaced by the smell of ozone and wet fur. The hospital gown dissolved into the dark durasteel of the corridor. Sable was straddling him, pinning him to the deck. Her hand was raised for another strike. Her golden eyes were glowing in the dark, fierce and terrified. Look at me, she commanded, her voice raw. Robert stared up at her. He was shaking violently. I saw her. Sable, she was right there. She was not there, Sable said, gripping his face with her claws hard enough to prick the skin but not break it. She is dead, Robert. I am here. I am alive. Feel this. She pressed his hand against her chest plate. He could feel the thundering rhythm of her heart beneath the armor. It was fast, powerful, real. This is real, Sable said. The dead do not have heartbeats. Do not you dare leave me for a ghost. Robert let out a ragged breath, the tears hot in his eyes. He focused on the rhythm of her heart. Thump, 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 thump. It grounded him. It pulled him back from the edge of the abyss. I am back, Robert whispered. I am back. Good, Sable said. She pulled him up. Because we have company. Rowan had engaged someone further down the corridor. There was the sound of a struggle, grunts, the screech of metal on armor, but no weapon fire. They were trying to be quiet. Sable and Robert rushed forward. Rowan had a figure pinned against the wall. The intruder was dressed in black tactical gear, wearing a full face mask. "Wolf!" Rowan growled. "I smell the pheromones." Sable ripped the mask off the intruder. It was a male wolf, young, his eyes wide with panic. On his neck was the tattoo of the White Mane, the extremist faction. But something was wrong. He was trembling, uncontrollably. "Do not kill me," the wolf stammered. "Please. I just placed the beacon." "What beacon?" Sable demanded, pressing her blade against his throat. "The interference beacon," the wolf cried. "To disrupt the cameras, to let the shadow in." "You are White Mane," Sable spat. "You claim to fight for wolf purity, yet you sabotage the spire. You endanger the whole pack." "We are not fighting," the wolf yelled, tears streaming into his fur. "We are bait. He told us we were heroes, but we are just bait." "Who?" Robert asked, stepping forward. "Who told you?" The wolf looked at Robert, then at Sable. "The soft skin, the one with the cold eyes, Hale. He gave us the codes. He gave us the scent maskers. He said if we caused enough chaos, the humans would be expelled, and the spire would be ours." Sable looked at Robert. "He is using my own extremists against me, playing to their vanity to destroy their future." "Where is the rhyme core?" Robert asked. "Did Hale give it to you?" The wolf shook his head frantically. No, he kept the box. He said he had a buyer, someone waiting in the dark." Robert felt a chill go through him. "A buyer in the dark." "Secure him," Sable ordered Rowan. "We are going to the command deck. We need to end this now." The command deck of the Ravelin Ark was a circular room, dominated by a massive holographic projection of the spire and the surrounding space. The red lighting here was even more oppressive. Captain Miriam Holt stood by the central table, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. Director Garrick Hale stood opposite her, looking entirely too calm for a man on a sinking station. When Sable, Robert, and Rowan burst in, dragging the bound prisoner, the silence that fell was absolute. "Director Hale," Sable announced, her voice carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "We have a witness." She shoved the White Mane extremist forward. "Tell them." The young wolf looked at Hale and whimpered. He was too terrified to speak. Hale sighed, brushing a speck of imaginary dust from his immaculate suit. "Commander Arden, dragging a terrorist onto the bridge. This is a breach of protocol." "He is not a terrorist," Robert said, stepping up beside Sable. "He is a patsy, and you are the handler." "Mr. Vance," Hale said, smiling that cold, dead smile. "I see you have decided to play detective instead of mechanic. It is a pity. You were quite good at fixing things." Hale turned to Captain Holt. "Captain, I am formally requesting that Mr. Vance be detained. His mental state is clearly compromised. He refused his medication. He is hallucinating conspiracies." "I am hallucinating nothing," Robert said. "You stole the rhyme core. You planted the fake detonator. You are trying to force a failure during the calibration." "Prove it," Hale said softly. "We have his testimony," Sable said, pointing to the prisoner. "The testimony of a radical insurgent." Hale laughed. "Captain Holt, are you really going to take the word of a creature sworn to kill humans over the word of a director of the Alliance?" Captain Holt looked between them. She looked at the terrified wolf, at the furious commander, and at the exhausted mechanic. "Director," Holt said slowly, "the allegations are serious, and the spire is acting strangely. If Mr. Vance believes the core is missing, the spire is unstable because of them." Hale pointed a finger at the wolves. "Their primitive rituals disrupt the harmonic resonance. That is why we need to institute the containment protocol immediately. We need to lock down the Wolf sector and purge the command structure." "You want a war," Sable said, her claws sliding out. "You want to massacre my people on the parade deck." "I want safety," Hale said. "And as for you, Commander, your marriage offers you no protection. My legal team has reviewed the footage. The bond was never certified by a human magistrate. Under Alliance law, Mr. Vance is a kidnapped civilian. I am authorized to use lethal force to retrieve him." Guards, human guards loyal to Hale, stepped forward. Weapons raised. Rowan growled, stepping in front of Sable. The bridge became a standoff. Robert looked at the guns pointed at him. He looked at Hale's smug face. He realized that logic wouldn't win this. Evidence wouldn't win this. Hale controlled the narrative. Robert needed to change the story. He stepped out from behind Rowan. He walked past Sable, ignoring her sharp intake of breath, and stood directly in front of Hale's guards. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a tired man in a dirty jumpsuit who had had enough. "You want to retrieve me?" Robert asked the lead guard. "Here I am." The guard hesitated. "But before you shoot," Robert said, raising his voice so the whole bridge could hear, "ask yourselves one question. Why is the director so afraid of a mechanic?" He turned to face the council table. "He says he is afraid of the spire. He says he is afraid of the aliens. But he is trying very hard to silence the one guy who knows how the machine actually works." Robert looked directly at Hale. "You are not afraid of the wolves, Garrick. You are afraid that I will fix it. You are afraid that if the spire stabilizes, you lose your excuse to be a dictator." "Arrest him," Hale snapped. "If you arrest me," Robert said, "the calibration fails tomorrow. The station implodes. We all die. You are not protecting these people, Hale. You are holding a gun to their heads and calling it a shield." Robert took a step closer to Hale. "So, tell the truth. Are you afraid of the spire, or are you afraid of me?" Hale's eye twitched. For a second, the mask slipped. Pure, unadulterated malice shone through. "You are an insignificance, Vance," Hale hissed. "You are a rounding error." "Maybe," Robert said, "but rounding errors crash systems." Captain Holt slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, there will be no arrests. Director Hale, until the calibration is complete. Mr. Vance is under my personal protection. If the spire fails, we can discuss legalities in the wreckage. Until then, he works." Hale stared at Holt. He realized he had lost the room. The guards lowered their weapons. "Very well," Hale said, straightening his jacket. "If you wish to bet your lives on a mechanic and a beast, that is your choice. I will be in my quarters, praying for our souls." He turned and walked out. As he passed Robert, he didn't look at him, but he whispered one word. "Goodbye." The adrenaline crash was brutal. Back in Sable's quarters, Robert collapsed onto the bed. His hands were shaking so hard he couldn't unbuckle his utility belt. Sable didn't say a word. She walked over, knelt in front of him, and undid the buckles with steady hands. She pulled his boots off. She took the heavy tool vest from his shoulders. The room was dark, lit only by the angry red pulsing of the spire outside the window. "You were reckless," Sable said softly. "I was effective," Robert mumbled. "Holt bought it. He was going to shoot you," Sable said. She looked up at him. She was still in her armor, hard and cold, but her face was open. "When you stepped out from behind Rowan, my heart stopped. Not metaphorically. It actually skipped a beat." "I had to show them I wasn't your pet," Robert said. "I had to be your partner." Sable sat back on her heels. She looked at him for a long time. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy with the things they had survived in the last 6 hours. "Robert," she said, "tomorrow the ceremony without the rhyme corps." "I know," Robert said. "We are going to have to improvise. I have to trick the spire into thinking the core is there. I have to use my own biorhythm as the signal. It could burn you out, Sable said. It could leave you a vegetable. It is a 50-50 shot, Robert lied. It was more like 10-90. Sable reached out and took his hand. Her claws were retracted. Her palm was warm. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? You could have taken a shuttle. You could have run. I do not know, Robert said. He looked at their joined hands, the human skin against the gray fur. Maybe because I am tired of running. Maybe because I found something worth fixing. He looked up at her golden eyes. Or maybe, Robert said, his voice dropping to a whisper, it is because my wife asked me to. Sable's breath hitched. I do not know about the future, Sable, Robert said. I do not know if we survive tomorrow. I do not know if humans and wolves can ever really live together without trying to kill each other. But I know one thing. He leaned forward. I choose this. I choose you. Not because of a treaty. Not because of a lie. But because right now in this room, you are the only thing that makes sense. Sable made a low, desperate noise in her throat. She surged up, grabbing his face with both hands. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It tasted of fear and adrenaline and the metallic tang of blood from a cut on her lip. It was a collision of two species on the brink of extinction, trying to find an anchor in the storm. Robert buried his hands in the thick fur at the nape of her neck. Sable's grip on his shoulders was bruising, holding him like he was the only solid thing in the universe. It wasn't a romance novel kiss. It was a seal. It was a contract signed in breath and desperation. I am here. You are here. We face the dark together. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Sable rested her forehead against his. If we die tomorrow, she whispered, I will find you in the veil. I will howl your name until the dark gives you back. If we die tomorrow, Robert said, managing a crooked smile, I am going to be very annoyed that I never got that coffee. Sable laughed a wet choke sound. She kissed him again, softer this time on the forehead. Sleep, she commanded. I will watch the door. No, Robert said. We watched together. While Robert and Sable sat in the dark, holding on to the fragile piece of the moment, a surveillance drone the size of a fly buzzed silently through the ventilation shaft of the diplomatic sector. It was recording. The feed showed Director Garrick Hale standing in the center of his lavish quarters. He was holding a small, ornate box made of lead-lined heavy metal, the Rhyme Corps. But he wasn't alone. The shadows in the corner of the room were moving. They weren't casting on the wall. They were peeling off it. A figure stood there tall, elongated, its edges blurring into smoke. It had no face, only a swirling vortex where a head should be. A veil echo. A fully manifested entity from the void. The arrangement is complete, Hale said to the monster. He didn't look afraid. He looked eager. The Wolf Commander and the mechanic are cornered. The calibration will fail. The barrier will fall. Hale held out the box. Here is the heart of the machine, as promised. The shadow reached out. Its hand was not a hand, but a tendril of absolute blackness. It didn't take the box. It passed through the box, absorbing its essence, draining the light from the crystals inside, without even opening the lid. The box turned gray and crumbled into dust in Hale's hands. Good, a voice spoke. It didn't come from the shadow. It came from the air itself, vibrating the water in the glass on Hale's desk. The door is unlocked. Now open it. Hale smiled. Tomorrow at noon, when they scream, you feast. The drone feed cut to black. The spire outside let out one final, long, agonized note that sounded exactly like a sob. The Silver Howl night was over. The day of the screaming had begun. The parade deck of the Ravelin Ark had been transformed from a place of military pageantry into something that resembled the inside of a cathedral, built inside a jet engine. The air was pressurized heavy, with the scent of ozone and burning incense, a futile attempt by the gray banner to mask the smell of raw, unshielded electricity. In the center of the vast deck, the spire rose like a column of trapped lightning. It was no longer the sleek, silent pillar Robert Vance had cleaned and calibrated for 10 years. Today, it was a living thing thrashing against its containment field, pulsing with a rhythm that made the teeth ache. Thousands of people were gathered. On the left, the Wolf Legion stood in phalanxes of silver and gray armor, their ears flattened, their bodies vibrating in sympathy with the machine. On the right, the human delegations stood behind kinetic barriers, looking pale and small against the scale of the technology they were trying to tame. Robert stood at the base of the spire, his hand hovering over the primary resonance console. He wore the ceremonial gray tunic of a bondmate, but his tool belt was strapped tightly over it. He felt ridiculous, like a mechanic who had wandered onto an opera stage. Beside him stood Commander Sable Arden. She was fully armored. Her helmet removed her golden eyes, scanning the crowd, not with pride, but with the hyper-awareness of a bodyguard waiting for a bullet. "It is too loud!" Robert shouted over the humming roar of the spire. "The variance is already at 4%. The crowd is terrified, Sable. The machine can taste it." "They have reason to be," Sable replied, her voice steady despite the tension in her jaw. "Director Hale has spread rumors that the calibration will fail. He wants them afraid. Fear makes them look at him for salvation." "Well, it is working," Robert muttered, checking the readouts. "If the collective heart rate of this room goes up by another 10 beats per minute, the spire is going to scream back." High above them on the observation balcony, Director Garrick Hale stood behind a wall of reinforced glass. He looked down at the ceremony like a god watching an ant farm he intended to flood. He raised his hand, signaling the start of the ritual. The lights on the deck dimmed, leaving only the spire's erratic violet glow to illuminate the faces of the crowd. "Begin the chant." The high priest of the Gray Banner howled from the dais. The wolves began to vocalize. It was a low, guttural thrumming sound designed to harmonize with the spire's frequency. But it was ragged. They were distracted. They could smell the fear coming from the human side of the room. Suddenly, the spire lurched. A wave of visible distortion rippled out from the core, passing through the bodies of the observers. A woman in the human section screamed, "I see him. I see my husband." "They are here," a man shouted, pointing at empty air. "The dead are here." Panic instant and infectious swept through the deck. The human crowd surged against the barriers. The spire fed on the spike of adrenaline, its violet light turning a bruised, angry red. The hum became a shriek. "Stabilize it!" Hale's voice boomed over the speakers, dripping with false concern. "The aliens are losing control." "He is doing this," Sable growled, her hand going to her sword. "He is amplifying the feedback loop." Robert looked at the console. The waveform was fracturing. The veil was pushing through. If they didn't calm the crowd, the spire would become a gateway, and Ravelin Ark would become a graveyard. "Sable," Robert said, grabbing her armored wrist. "They are not listening to the chant. It is too alien. They need something human." Robert grabbed the emergency microphone from the console. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for a cue. He keyed it to the general address system, overriding the priest. "Hey!" Robert's voice cracked through the panic, loud and unpolished. "Listen to me, eyes up front." The sheer informality of it stunned the crowd into a momentary silence. "My name is Robert," he said, forcing his voice to be calm, the kind of calm he used when explaining a catastrophic engine failure to a junior tech. "I am the guy who fixes the air conditioning. I am the guy who makes sure your gravity plating doesn't turn off while you are sleeping." He looked up at the terrified faces. "The machine is not angry," Robert said. "It is just loud. It is like a dog barking at thunder. If you panic, it panics. So I need you to do me a favor. I need you to breathe." He took a deep, exaggerated breath into the mic. In for 4 seconds, Robert instructed. Out for 4. He looked at Sable. She understood instantly. She took a breath, her chest plate rising visibly. The wolf soldiers trained to follow their commander copied her. In, Robert counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, out. Slowly, miraculously, the collective panic began to ebb. The human heart rates slowed. The frantic energy that the spire was feeding on began to dissipate. The red light of the core shifted back toward violet. "It is working," Sable whispered, looking at him with awe. "You are grounding them." "I am boring them to sleep," Robert corrected, sweating profusely. "It is a specialized skill." Boom. The explosion rocked the southern blast doors. Debris rained down on the wolf phalanx. Smoke billowed into the arena. "White Mane," someone screamed. A squad of heavily armed extremists burst through the smoke-firing plasma rifles into the air. But they weren't aiming at the soldiers. They were aiming at the coolant tanks. "They are trying to overheat the core," Robert yelled. "Defend the perimeter," Sable roared, drawing her energy blade. "Gray Banner, push them back. Do not let them touch the tanks." The deck descended into chaos. The wolves clashed with the extremists. The humans screamed and scrambled for cover. Above, in the observation booth, Hale smiled. He tapped a command into his datapad. "Now." At the base of the spire, Robert's console went dead. "I am locked out," Robert shouted. "The manual override is gone. Someone is rewriting the rhythm from the inside." "Hale," Sable hissed. She looked at the battle raging around them, then up at the glass booth. "He is using the stolen core logic. He is forcing the spire to open the gate." "Go," Robert said. "You take Hale. I will try to hotwire the bypass." "I cannot leave you unprotected," Sable argued, parrying a stray bolt of plasma. "I am not alone," a deep voice rumbled. Rowan Pierce slid into position beside Robert. The massive wolf captain was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his shoulder, his gray fur matted with red. But he held his shield generator steady, creating a dome over Robert and the console. "Go, Commander," Rowan grunted, slamming his shield into a White Mane attacker who got too close. "Do not let her be alone." Sable looked at Rowan, then at Robert. She nodded once, a sharp military gesture, and sprinted toward the maintenance ladder that led to the observation deck. Robert dropped to his knees, ripping the panel off the console. "Okay," he muttered to the wires. "You want to play hard to get let's play." "Hurry, human," Rowan growled, flinching as a plasma bolt struck his shield. "My battery is at 20%, and my shoulder is displeased." "I am working on it," Robert yelled, stripping a wire with his teeth. "Just keep the bad guys off the lawn." He looked up. The spire was changing. The violet light was gone. In its place was a swirling vortex of absolute blackness. And out of that blackness, something was emerging. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't an army. It was a Veil Echo. It looked like a cloud of ink dropped into water, but it had a shape. It had the shape of every nightmare the station had ever dreamed. It shifted, form a screaming child, a burning city, a wolf with no face. "Robert," Rowan whispered, his shield wavering. "Do not look at it." "I have to look at it," Robert said, his hands flying over the exposed circuitry. "It is not just a monster, Rowan. It is a frequency. Hale is broadcasting fear, and the Veil is answering." Up on the observation deck, Sable kicked the door in. Director Hale turned slowly. He was holding a remote interface device. Behind him, the glass wall showed the Veil Echo, growing larger, its tendrils reaching out to touch the minds of the people below. "You are too late, Commander," Hale said smoothly. "The bridge is built. The White Mane did their job. Chaos reigns. And now I bring an order." "You call this order?" Sable snarled, stepping over the unconscious bodies of Hale's personal guard. "You are feeding a parasite." "I am harnessing a power source," Hale corrected. "With the spire under my control, I can navigate the Veil. I can hold the entire trade route hostage. The Alliance will pay any price for safe passage. And the wolves, you will be my mercenaries. My dogs. Sable lunged. Hale tapped a button. A gravity trap in the floor activated, pinning Sable to the deck with 5 times normal gravity. She slammed down, gasping, her armor creaking under the pressure. Primitive, Hale scoffed. He looked down at the chaos below. And now for your husband. Hale's voice boomed over the speakers again, amplified to a deafening volume. Robert Vance. Down on the deck, Robert froze. I know you can hear me, Robert, Hale said. I know you are trying to bypass the lockout. Stop. Robert looked up at the booth. If you touch that wire, Hale threatened, I will invert the containment field. I will not just open the door. I will blow the roof off. Everyone on this deck dies. The vacuum takes them all. Robert hesitated. His hand was inches from the connection that would reset the rhythm. Look at them, Robert, Hale taunted. Look at your wife pinned to the floor. Look at the humans cowering. You can save them. All you have to do is step away. Let the spire destabilize. Let me save the station. Surrender, and I will let you live. Robert stood up slowly. He looked at Rowan, who was panting heavily, his shield flickering and dying. He looked at Sable struggling against the gravity well. He looked at the Veil Echo, which was now looming over the crowd, feeding on their terror. You think this is about safety, Robert said, his voice carried by the open mic on the console. You think you can own this. Oh, I do own this, Hale shouted. No, Robert said. He smiled, a tired mechanic's smile. You are a user, Hale. You just press buttons. You do not know how the machine feels. Robert looked at the black shape of the Veil Echo. He realized what it was. It wasn't a monster invading them. It was a reflection. It was an echo of the signal Hale was sending. Fear creates fear. We do not need to fight it, Robert whispered to himself. We need to confuse it. Robert, no! Sable screamed from the booth, sensing what he was about to do. Robert didn't step away. He didn't surrender. He grabbed 2 high-voltage cables, the primary input, and the phase inverter, and he jammed them together. He didn't ground the signal. He reversed it. Phase inversion, Robert yelled. He grabbed the microphone. Everyone do not be afraid, laugh. What? Rowan looked at him like he was insane. Laugh, Robert screamed. Think of something funny. Think of Hale's stupid haircut. Think of a cat falling off a table. The echo feeds on fear. Give it the opposite frequency. Robert started to laugh. It was a manic, terrified sound, but it was genuine. Come on, you ugly smoke cloud, is that all you got? The reaction was immediate. The spire, confused by the sudden introduction of a completely dissonant, emotional frequency, shuddered. The Veil Echo, which had been forming a shape of terror, suddenly rippled. It tried to mimic the laughter, but the signal was incompatible with its nature. It began to vibrate. No, Hale shouted, hammering on his controls. Stop it, you are corrupting the data stream. I am not corrupting it, Robert said, holding the sparking cables together, even as the heat blistered his gloves. I am harmonizing it. Sable, understanding the plan, stopped fighting the gravity. She closed her eyes and let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. It was defiant. Down on the deck, a few soldiers, seeing the absurdity of the moment, started to chuckle, then more. It spread. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the hysterical laughter of people who had stared death in the face and decided to wink. The Veil Echo shrieked. It couldn't hold its form. The contradictory signals, fear from Hale, defiance, and humor from Robert, tore it apart. With a sound like tearing silk, the black cloud collapsed in on itself. The spire let out a massive clear chime, a pure C major chord that rang through the bones of everyone on the station. The red light vanished. The violet light returned, steady and calm. The gravity trap in the booth failed. Sable moved instantly. She surged up from the floor and tackled Hale. He didn't even have time to scream before he was pinned against the glass, her blade hovering an inch from his eye. "The show is over, Director," Sable hissed. Down below, Robert dropped the cables. His hands were smoking. He slumped against the console, sliding down until he hit the deck. "That," Robert wheezed, "was the worst punchline I have ever delivered." Fun. Rowan Pierce dropped his shield and sat down heavily beside him. The big wolf let out a long, groaning breath. "You told the enemy to look at his haircut," Rowan said, shaking his head. "You are a lunatic. I approve." The aftermath was a blur of medical teams and security cordons. Captain Miriam Holt arrived with a squad of Marines to take custody of Director Hale. The director was not laughing anymore. He was shouting about jurisdiction and diplomatic immunity, but no one was listening. "You think you won," Hale spat as he was dragged past Sable and Robert on the lower deck. "You think this changes anything? You just delayed the inevitable. Humanity will never accept the wolves. You are just delaying the war." He stopped in front of Sable, a sneer twisting his face. "And you," he looked at Robert, "do not think she saved you because she loves you. You were a prop, a human shield. She played her part perfectly." Sable didn't flinch. She just watched him get dragged away. But Robert saw her hand tremble. "He is gone," Robert said, reaching out to touch her arm. "It is over, Sable. We did it." Sable pulled away. It was a small movement, but it felt like a canyon opening between them. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was hollow. "In private." They went to the small observation lounge near the spire's base. It was quiet here. The spire hummed gently outside, a soothing rhythmic purr. The station was safe. The Alliance was intact. Captain Holt was there waiting for them. She held a data pad. "Robert," Holt said. She looked uncomfortable. "There is some paperwork we need to clear up regarding your status." "Right," Robert said, sinking into a chair. "The marriage. Look, I know it was a battlefield decision. I am guessing we can annul it pretty easily now that Hale is out of the picture." Holt looked at Sable. Sable was standing by the window, her back to them. She looked stripped down raw, even though she was still wearing her armor. "There is no need for an annulment," Holt said quietly. "Because there is no marriage," Robert blinked. I checked the Wolf Law archives," Holt said, tapping the pad. "I checked the treaty stipulations. There is no provision in the Gray Banner Code that allows for a battlefield bond to override Alliance jurisdiction. There is no law that says a commander's mate is immune to prosecution." Robert frowned, looking at Sable's back. "But she said if she didn't claim me, Hale would have me arrested. She said the bond gave me protection." "It did give you protection," Holt said, "but not legal protection. It gave you social protection. By claiming you, she put her personal honor between you and Hale. She dared him to shoot her husband. But legally it was a bluff. If Hale had called it, if he had checked the books, he could have shot you both." Holt placed the pad on the table. "I will leave you two alone." The door slid shut. Robert stared at the back of the woman who had saved his life. "You lied," Robert said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization." Sable turned around. She didn't look like a commander. She looked like a person who had run out of armor. "I received the liquidation order for you 3 minutes before the ceremony on the parade deck," Sable said softly. "Hale had signed it. Asset Vance is to be removed as a security risk immediately. They were going to vent your quarters while you slept." She took a breath. "I had no legal way to stop it. I had no authority over human security protocols. The only thing I had was my reputation." "So you invented a law," Robert whispered. "I invented a scandal," Sable corrected. "I knew that if I claimed you as my mate in front of the entire fleet, Hale couldn't kill you quietly. He would have to kill the commander's husband publicly. It would start a war. I knew he wasn't ready for war yet. I used myself as a human shield. You made yourself a target, Robert said, standing up. You let everyone think you were forcing me. You let your own soldiers doubt you. You let Hale mock you. It was the only way to buy you time, Sable said. I lied to you, Robert. I told you it was a duty. I told you it was law. Because if I told you the truth, that I was stripping away my own command authority just to keep a mechanic alive, you would not have accepted it. You would have tried to be a hero. You would have gotten yourself killed. She looked down at her hands. I am sorry, she said. I manipulated you, just like Hale. Robert stood there, the silence stretching out. He processed it, the sheer insanity of it. She hadn't married him to control him. She had destroyed her own political standing, risked a mutiny, and painted a target on her back, just to put an invisible shield around him. You are right, Robert said. Sable flinched. You are a terrible liar, Robert said. He walked over to her. He stopped a foot away. Hale manipulated me to get power, Robert said. You manipulated the entire galaxy to get me a tomorrow. He reached out and took her hand. He felt the roughness of her palm, the sharp tips of her claws. So, Robert said, the touch me, I'm your wife thing, that was all improv. It was inspired by a drama serial I watched once. Sable admitted a faint flush of violet coloring her cheeks. It seemed effective, Robert laughed. He laughed until his ribs hurt. It was the relief of survival, the absurdity of the universe, and the overwhelming realization of what she had done for him. You are ridiculous, Robert said, wiping his eyes. I am discharged of my duty, Sable said formally, trying to pull her hand away. The crisis is over. Hale is gone. You are free, Robert. You can go back to your engines. You can go back to Earth. No one will stop you. Free, Robert repeated. He looked out at the spire. It was calm now. The tear in the sky was gone. The voices were silent. He looked at Sable. He saw the loneliness she carried. He saw the strength it took to stand alone against the dark. I tried to leave once, Robert said. Back when I was just a tech. I thought freedom meant not having anyone to answer to. I thought it meant silence. He squeezed her hand. But I have heard the silence now, Sable. It is cold. And it is full of ghosts. Sable looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. What are you saying? I am saying, Robert said, stepping closer, closing the gap, that the law might have been fake, but the vow, I think I accidentally meant it. Robert, she whispered, you do not have to. I know I do not have to, Robert interrupted. That is the point. That is the difference between us and Hale. He thinks people are things to be owned. He thinks loyalty is a code you program. Robert raised her hand and pressed it against his chest right over his heart. I am not staying because of a treaty. I am not staying because I am afraid of the veil. I am staying because you are the only person in the galaxy who knows that I take my coffee black, and you are the only one who stood in front of a firing squad for a mechanic. He smiled at her. I choose this, Sable. I choose you. And if the universe has a problem with a human mechanic loving a wolf commander well, they can come and file a complaint with me directly. Sable stared at him. The hard shell of the commander cracked, and for a moment she was just Sable. You are going to be a very difficult husband, she murmured, her voice trembling. And you are going to be a very high-maintenance wife, Robert countered. I expect a lot of howling. Sable didn't answer with words. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. It was the gesture of the pack. Acceptance. Belonging. Then it is settled, she whispered. We stay. Outside the spire pulsed one slow, steady beat, a heartbeat, shared by two different species standing in the light. The war for the corridor was over. The war for their future had just begun. But for the first time, neither of them was fighting alone. Come on, Robert said, pulling her gently toward the door. Let's go home. I need to fix the coffee machine. Robert! Yeah, touch me again, she said softly, and I might bite you. Promise, Robert grinned. They walked out of the observation lounge hand in hand, leaving the shadows behind them. The Ravelin Ark drifted in the silence of space, no longer a cage, but a fortress built on the strangest, strongest alloy in the universe, a choice.